And truly, that is the way to manifest the love for God and love for our fellow man, is that we take that time and we care for one another in those ways. So before you think I made a mistake with the title, before Moses was, I am. Yes, the scripture doesn't say that. Scripture says, before Abraham was, I am. It was Jesus who said that. He is the great I am. But our title is based loosely on John 8:58. The premise I'll be presenting today is that the moral requirements of God's laws, specifically, but not just limited to the Ten Commandments, have been enforced since the beginning of creation. Malachi 3:6, for I am the Lord, I change not, therefore you sons of Jacob are not consumed. That means his holy character doesn't change, and his mercy is present, and therefore he does not consume you for your sin. And then Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. God has made himself known, and he's always made himself known. Romans says that through the creation we know him. But some have thoughts that, based on these couple of scriptures, that there was no biblical law prior to Moses. All right, let's read those in the record. Romans 4:15, because the law is working wrath, for where no law is, there's no transgression. So some people think, well, before the law was given to Moses, there was no law, so there's no transgression, right? Ron talked about this a lot in his Romans series. Romans 5:12-14, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned, but until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned, after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. When we examine the context of these verses, we discover Paul is not saying that there was no law prior to Moses. Rather, he's saying the law isn't counted against us because we're in Christ by faith, in the longer context of his letter. There was a law before Moses. Even the simplest command in the garden, thou shalt not eat, was a command. And we know that the law teaches us what is sin. And we know that we're not justified by sin, right? Law teaches us what sin is, right? It doesn't justify you in any way. As a matter of fact, it probably condemns you because you have transgressed law, right? So there's no salvation in law keeping of its own self. And the verses on your screen let you know that it's the righteousness which is by faith of Jesus Christ unto all that believe, right? And you can play the word games with the faith of Christ, faith in Christ. The faith of Christ was he trusted his Father would work all things out. And that should be the exact same faith we have. You're not relying just on his faith. You have your own faith in him and his finished work, which was part of the Father's plan. But we all do know that 1 John 3:4 says that whoever is committing sin is transgressing also the law, for sin is transgression of the law. So we do find, when we look at the Bible, we find transgressions of the Ten Commandments sinful before Moses went up to the mount to receive the tablets of the law, don't we? We clearly do, right? And we'll look at some of those today just briefly. But later God had Moses describe and define and elaborate on and add to those godly moral principles, and he did so in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy per God's instruction. He also was added the rules of the tabernacle or temple and the offerings. One of our main verses today is this one, Genesis 26:5. Because that Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So some people will want to oppose faith with commandment keeping, and they are not opposed. Your faith is made perfect by your works. Okay, so Abraham clearly is the father of faith. He is called such, and but we also know that he obeyed from the heart. whatever was given to him, the commandments given to him. So there's a lot of conversation then, well, what is that? What are the charged commandments, statutes, and laws that were given to Abraham? Or are they identical to everything Moses had? Well, it would seem that by the scriptures that there was law added, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But just to, we'll give you one scripture that you can put in your notes, and that's Deuteronomy 4:8. That kind of will take a lot of that away. All the laws that he gave to Israel, some of them were already enjoined before Sinai, but others came afterwards. They were added. And Deuteronomy 4:8 says, "What nation is there so great that has statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day?" They weren't out there already, right? Some of the things that they did. That was a special covenant with Israel. But that doesn't mean there wasn't law beforehand, as we can tell just by Adam sinning that there was law, right? Certainly there was law in Abraham's day. Seemed like personal vengeance was the rule. Cain feared, after he killed his brother Abel, that, hey, whoever finds me is going to come and kill me. And, there was really no judgment pronounced upon him at the time, right? So we don't know the full extent of the laws kept by early men such as Enoch and Noah, Abraham, Job. Job, you would timeline that around between the time of Abraham and Moses, maybe. Some put it earlier. But again, Job is a great example too. We won't talk about him a lot today, but I mean, he wasn't of the tribes of Israel at all. He was a Gentile, if you will, and he was perfect before the Lord too, that the Lord would even, compliment his righteousness of his own, right? But taught him lessons of the righteousness of God. So we're going to look briefly at some of the legal codes that were around during those days in the land of Mesopotamia. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on these. I'll have a lot of information on the slides that I'm just going to, as a matter of fact, there's a download. I don't know, Ron, maybe you could tell people how to find that, of a PDF that has a bunch of codes of law. Now, I spent like days looking at the codes of laws, and I'm bringing you very little of that. So that was stuff that was, how I spent my time this week. But I do want to talk about a couple of these. And you see approximate timelines, the dates, give them a couple of 100 years here and there, because, we don't really have markers that would tell us exactly when it is. The best we can do is estimate some of these things. But you see that there are a lot of law codes, and these go from the oldest down to Moses, the newest, and there was laws after him in the bold here. So that there were sets of codified laws before the time of Moses, right? And some people will accuse, well, Moses borrowed those from Hammurabi, right? And well, we'll talk a little bit about that too. He didn't. I hear there's the short story. He didn't. But there was some wisdom and some knowledge of God and his principles out there, even if it wasn't in the full true understanding of the one true God. I'll give you this, the chicken and the egg, right? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, we know the chicken because God created the animals, fully able to reproduce, right? So in that pattern, the truth came first, right? God was true, right? And then anything false or paganism came after that, right? Because God didn't start in falsehood, he started in truth with his people, right? Satan introduced some falsehood right in the garden, right there. But as things over time, that truth would get distorted, and people would attribute God's powers to other things, false gods that are no gods, or that they would distort the teachings. And unless they were corrected by divine influence, be it a prophet from God or whatever, that they would continue on in those ways. I do think that a lot of the mythologies we have and a lot of the things that we call paganism came from things that were true and got distorted over time. I'm going to take a quick look at the Code of Hammurabi. So if you got a Bullinger Companion Bible, he says that Amraphel is also transliterated Hammurabi, which is Hammurabi. I don't believe that's true. I believe that they were in a separate timeline. But some people do believe that. Now, Hammurabi was one of the earliest and most complete code systems that was put together. He reigned in the 1700s BC, and he was the sixth king in the Babylonian dynasty, which ruled central Mesopotamia, which is around present-day Iraq. Okay, and he expanded the city-state of Babylon along the Euphrates River to unite all of southern Mesopotamia. And his code of laws, which they've counted at 282 rules, established justice and standards for commercial interactions and set fines and punishments to meet the requirements of justice, right? And his laws were preserved mainly on this big black pillar. It's about 10 foot tall. And on the top of it was a picture of Hammurabi with the god Shamash giving him the law. See, the God giving the law to the prophet, so to speak. And so I do think that these were foretold things that got changed, right, and got twisted, right? Now, going back that far, the only true solid proof you're going to have is what's in here. So there isn't a lot others to go on. So, but it's I don't think it's wrong for us to be able to judge by the things that are not seen. Some of those things. I do think that there's enough proof that God's law was in existence that people could have taken from it and then started to understand principles of justice and equity and then tried to apply them on their own. So in his words on the monument, he said, he's to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. That's a good thing, right? Good government. And to see that justice is done to widows and orphans. Very much matches what the law of God requires as well, right? To establish law and justice in the language of the land, right? To make everyone be able to understand the law, right? Kind of like Ezra standing up on a pulpit to give the explanation, the meaning of the law to the people, right? And then he said he was also there to promote the welfare of the people, right? And they would put up these pillars at various spots around so that people would know and understand the law. They wanted you to understand the law because if you understood the law, chances are more likely you're going to obey the law or stay within those confines of the law, right? But his laws are more a collection of legal precedents. This happened, so this is the fine for that, or this is the punishment for that. It's called Lex Talionis, which means basically the law of retribution, or as you would say, it's the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth law, right? And that's very much in there. The Code of Hammurabi, and you can like I said, it's in that download under shared files, but along with other codes that we're going to talk a little bit about today, that sometimes they were very harsh punishments, including, cutting out tongues, cutting off hands or other body parts, eyes and ears, and so forth. But there was also some good things of it too. Like it's one of the earliest examples of an accused person being able to be considered innocent until proven guilty by some witnesses. The other thing about Hammurabi's law, after days of reading, I'd like to share with you, is also that he seemed to often outline different standards of justice for the different classes of Babylonian society, right? The propertied class or the rich, the freedmen, and then the slaves, right? So poor, middle class, and rich, so to speak.
Some things don't change, yeah?
Some things don't change, right? Well, and the governments are supposed to be for the people, right? So here's a close-up of the top of the monument of him receiving the laws supposedly from the god Shamash, which is the sun, like a sun god type of thing. I'm going to read just a couple excerpts of what's on this, and not all the laws, just some of the wording. He has a preamble to it. Most of these laws, that's how they start. Hey, this is who I am and what I'm about. Here's my laws, and then don't destroy these laws and don't take my name off this pillar or you're going to be cursed. Type of. That's kind of how these things went. So now he was you've heard of Marduk or Merodach in the Bible, right? So that was his false god, right, that he had bowed to, amongst others, right? So let me read some of this. He says, An and Bel called me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince and worshiper of the gods, to cause justice to prevail in the land and to destroy the wicked and evil, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak, to enlighten the land and to further the welfare of the people. Wonderful things if you take out the idolatry, right? So, and what they weren't always, I mean, because they were pagan or they had some form of idolatry doesn't mean that they were all bad. As a matter of fact, if you turn to Revelation, you'll read about churches that have idolatry, but he says, hey, you're still savable, right? A couple more things. When Marduk sent me to rule the people and to bring help to the country, I established law and justice in the land and promoted the welfare of the people. The righteous laws which Hammurabi, the wise king, established and by which he gave the land stable support and pure government. Hammurabi, the perfect king, am I. So he's really humble too. But you could see how he fashioned himself off of things that, and people say, well, Satan likes to imitate God. Well, yeah, so did people, right? Because they're created in God's image. And they would keep parts of things, not understanding the rest and making up the rest in their mind, like a lot of people do at Bible study. But I digress. So he says, my words are precious, my wisdom is unrivaled, typifying that these words came from a deity, right? By the command of Shamash, the great judge of heaven and earth, may I make righteousness to shine forth on the land. So again, remove the idolatry and see that he was still trying to do some good there. There was some personal righteousness involved in some of this, because that's how you got to rule people, right? We want to have righteous rule. We all do, like modern politics today, right? Exactly. Let any oppressed man who has a cause come before my image as king of righteousness, he says, right? So now, don't take the wording. I mean, these are all translations from the cuneiform and stuff. So different people may have archaeologists may have translated them slightly different. So just because he says king of righteousness doesn't mean he's setting himself up to be, Melchizedek or anything. Yeah, right. But he says, I who am a king of righteousness, that I may rule my people in righteousness, right? So his laws reflected, and it's on the screen here, a quote from Mesopotamia and the birth of civilization. He says, Hammurabi's law reflect the shock of an unprecedented social environment, the multi-ethnic, multi-tribal Babylonian world. Sounds like America today almost. In early Sumerian, Akkadian times, all communities had felt themselves to be joint members of the same family, all equally servants under the eyes of the gods. In such circumstances, disputes could be settled by recourse to a collectively accepted value system where blood was thicker than water and fair restitution more desirable than revenge. But he says, as we rub shoulders with the nomads of the land, they didn't get it as much, so now we had to establish these laws and codify these laws, kind of the way he put it. So before Hammurabi, there was the Code of Lipit Ishtar. Yes, that is Ishtar. So it's a Sumerian law code attributed to Lipit Ishtar, the ruler of Isin, somewhere around the 1900s BCE. And he proclaimed himself the king of Sumer and Akkad, right? He was the fifth king of the first dynasty. And let me tell you what I can tell you about him. Very little of this code has been found. As a matter of fact, the front half is still missing. But the little bit that's there, you see a fascinating legal code. Very fascinating. And because you can get a glimpse into the daily life of some of the societies of time, right? He talks about governing the use of boats down the rivers, right? Real estate transactions, especially involving orchards. He describes a system of slavery, inheritance, marriage, and the regulation of oxen and cattle. So you can read all that. No, I'll read some excerpts of this. So again, just like I read Hammurabi, I just wanted to show that they had some basic principles of justice and equity involved in some of this stuff. And these were the laws that were were extant around where Abraham lived and grew up, right? So this is Anu and Elil. They had called Lipit Ishtar the wise shepherd, right, to establish justice in the land and to banish complaints, to turn back enmity and rebellion by force of arms, and to bring well-being to the Sumerians and Akkadians, right? So that's what he wanted to do. So he established justice with these laws. One of the quotes he has in there, and I put it in bold there, he says, I made the father support his children, and I made the children support their father. Reminds you of a verse in the Bible, doesn't it, right? Turning the hearts of the children to the father. And I made the father stand by his children. I made the children stand by the father. So he goes to, talks about it in his pagan myth, how he got his law and whatever. I put an example law up in there. And you could read that. I'm not going to belabor the time because there are quite a few laws in there. But I do want to close with his how he sums it up on this tablet, if you will. He says, accordance with the true word of Utu, that would have been like their God the Father type. The Babylonians actually later called that same entity Shemesh. So he says, I caused Sumner and Akkad to hold to true justice. In accordance with the pronouncement, I abolished enmity and rebellion, made weeping and lamentations. Tabu caused righteousness and truth to shine forth and brought well-being to the peoples, right? And so he says, again, a curse put upon you, anybody who takes this and makes this tablet their own, takes my name off and puts their name on, right? They didn't want the plagiarism of their laws and so forth. And well, that happens a lot in history, right? They erased the history, kind of like stuff that's going on now in the cancel culture, right? They erased the history so that you wouldn't remember them and you would just remember their current rule, so that it would encourage trust and obedience to that rule. Okay, laws of Hashanah. There's 2 Cuneiform tablets. They were discovered in Iraq, and they're copies of an older source as they are recorded as such. And Hashanah was laid east of Babylon, and like I said, eventually it got conquered. This was before Hammurabi, but eventually Hammurabi conquered this land, right? So when he conquered that land, he would have saw their pillars and their laws already on it. So maybe he didn't just make these things up on his own. Maybe he did take the different laws. As I read when I was younger in history class, that he codified the existing laws of the land. And it's very possible he grabbed the laws from these various sources and kept what he wanted and put them into code, trying to unify the people once again, and to bring, because if you bring peace and prosperity to the people, then you do well, and you get to continue being the ruler. So the Code of Hashuna is fairly short. It covers a wide range of topics, price controls for barley and wool, and there's regulations for theft, status of slaves, marital relations, crimes of violence, if you have vicious animals and they've caused harm, what to do.
Yeah, you're back on the TV there, so
it should be. All right. Yeah, a little internet problem. So the Law of Hashanah, it was there to establish justice, eliminate enmity, and protect the weak, right? The main thing about Hashanah that I learned was it was the way it was written. It was written to be memorized as an easy text for memorization because, again, they wanted you to know the law, right? Okay, so the last one we'll talk about before we get into some comparisons is Ernamu. So there is an older one besides Ernamu that I was going to put on here, but there's not a lot of content to it. It's the Code of Urak Agena, which is older than, probably predates the flood actually, but it doesn't have any content that was translatable that I could use here today for you. So, but this is the Code of Ernamu. It's the oldest known surviving code. It's from Mesopotamia, written on tablets in the Sumerian language. And according to the Sumerian kings list, Ernamu was a king who reigned for 18 years. Other names are Ernama, Enger, or Gur. Originally, when they first found the first piece, only 5 of the laws here were discernible, but they found other tablets that matched them, and they translated them, and then they allowed some 30 of the existing 57 laws to be reconstructed. So, and they found another tablet with some variants, but they were able to piece together what they could. So, the Code of Ernamu assumed a universal understanding on the part of the people that all the law had descended from the gods, just like what was down to Lipit Ishtar and to Hammurabi. This is how that tradition kind of got started, which came from the truth, which was original, right? So that the law came down from God, and the king was simply an administrator of those laws, right? So there is a truth and commonality in that. Now, that doesn't forgive the idolatry, piece, but I just want to make that clear that these weren't just dreadful, terrible people always sacrificing children and doing whatever, right? These were people of what you would call a good government in many occasions, right? And I'll read from his preamble on here. He says, in accordance with the true word of Utu, once again, established equity in the land. He banished malediction, violence, and strife, and set the monthly temple expenses at 90 gur of barley, 30 sheep, and 30 selah of butter. So they set that, the idolatrous worship at the time, but it just goes to show that they had some of these things already. He also designed, and he compliments himself on fashioning the measure called the sila in relation to a mina or mina, and the stone weight of a shekel of silver in relation to a mina. So he, kind of gives all his accomplishments. But he says this, and this one caught my eye. The orphan was not delivered up to the rich man. This is one of his boasts on the tablet. The orphan wasn't delivered up to the rich man. The widow was not delivered up to the mighty man. And the man of 1 shekel was not delivered up to the man of 1 mina, the poor man to the rich man. So very, very interesting. And they had, I'll give you an example of one of the laws. If a man appeared as a witness, he was shown to be a perjurer, he must pay 15 shekels of silver. But if a man appears as a witness but withdraws his oath, he must make payment to the value of the litigation of the case. So you said you were it was a case about $100, and you said you were going to testify, and you withdrew your oath. Now you pay the $100, right? Because something was wrong there. It was a good judgment, I think. Now, very different than the Bible. Here's some codes compared. I said we would get into this. I don't want to spend, again, a lot of time on this. So I'm going to kind of run a little fast through some of this. So in Exodus, we know if a man steals an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he should restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 for a sheep. And if a man delivers his neighbor's money or stuff to keep, and it's stolen out of the man's house, sure, it might have been stolen, right? Then if the thief be found, he has to pay double. But look at how they relate to the Code of Hammurabi. If somebody steals from his house, they're put to death, right? And if a man practiced robbery and is caught, they're put to death. If the robber's not captured, this is interesting, the man who has been robbed shall, in the presence of God, make and itemize a statement of his loss, and the city and the governor whose jurisdiction the robbery was, they have to pay him because they didn't keep him safe. Huh? No, they put the burden on the government to guard and protect them from robbery. So I thought that was interesting. That was an odd one. I don't know where if Hammurabi made that one up or if he got it codified it from somewhere else in the land. I didn't see any in all my scrubbing of the laws of Mesopotamia. So the Code of Hashuna, if you give your neighbor something, of yours, and then he says it was stolen, if he testifies and says, I take an oath, I've done nothing fraudulent, it's done, forgotten. There's no claim against him. Right? Interesting. And then in the Code of Ernamu, if you commit a robbery, you just like in Hammurabi's code, you would be killed. So difference in the Bible, but they still had some similar laws on the books, just how they would pronounce judgments. The judgments were different. All right, codes. Whoever strikes his father or mother shall be put to death, says the Bible. All right, Hammurabi just says, yeah, if a son strikes his father, we'll just cut off his hand. Okay, give him another chance. He's got 2 chances at least, right? So, just a difference. Kidnapping or man stealing. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. So that's if you kidnap somebody, you get put to death, and whoever you sold them to, they get put to death as well. Right? The Code of Hammurabi says if a free man stole the young son of another free man, then he should be put to death too. So that matched. And then the Code of Ernamu, that they didn't put the capital punishment for it. They said rather he was to be imprisoned, and it doesn't say for how long, and pay 15 shekels of silver. They did have prisons. Huh? So this is about striving together. Personal injury. The Bible has, if 2 men strive together, one smites another with a stone or with his fist, and he doesn't die, but he's bedridden, then if he rises and walks again, then you're okay. You're forgiven. But you got to pay for the loss of time and his doctor bills, right, to be thoroughly healed, right? Hammurabi also had to pay the doctor bills, and you also have to say that you didn't do it wittingly, on purpose. I imagine there was another law for if you did it on purpose, but I didn't find it in reading the code. So if the man die of his wound, he'll swear similarly, the deceased, and then you got to pay money. So Code of Hashuna, the same thing, and the Code of Hashuna went down by different body parts. 60 shekels of silver. If you cut off your nose, 60 for an eye, only 30 for a tooth or an ear. And down to 10 shekels if you injure somebody other than a bad wound. You're not taking a body part, like you bruise them or something, right? It goes down. The Code of Ernamu. If a man cuts the foot off another man, I'm like, how often did they happen that they had to make that a law? But you can only get 10 shekels of silver for a foot. So, and then if you shatter the bone with a club, then you get 60 shekels. Interesting. All the way down to knocking out a tooth, you get 2 shekels. So you only got 2 shekels for a tooth in Ernamu. And in Hashuna, you got 30 shekels. So that was the cost of inflation. So, and one more code, so the law of the goring of the ox. So, long and short of it, the Bible says that if an ox gore a man or woman and they die, then that you have to kill the ox and don't eat it. Right? Yeah. I don't know the significance behind that, but I'm sure that there is some, right? But the owner of the ox is acquitted. He's okay, right? Well, if the ox was wont to push with his horn, gore people before, he's a known gorer, then the ox gets stoned, and also the owner, because the owner didn't take the precautions. If he knew that he was, should have cut off his horn or kept him penned up or what have you, right? And then let's see. If the ox pushes a manservant or maidservant, they got to pay 30 units of silver, and the ox gets stoned. Right? When it says pushes, that means gore. Hits them with the horn. And if a man shall open a pit and not cover it, and the ox or the ass falls in, they have to make it good and give the owner the money, but then they get the dead beast. Right? They get to buy it. And if one man's ox hurts another that he dies, then they'll sell the live ox, divide the money, and the dead ox they divide and get to have it for food. Right? You'll see the Code of Hammurabi has some similarities, right? Let's see. A free man, again, compared to a slave, there's a difference in price. The Code of Hashuna, you see the difference. They get to divide the dead ox, but the live ox still gets to be kept by the owner if it's an ox versus ox case. And they also have to pay differences for a free man or a slave, right? And the Code of Literature is very similar, and except that it goes into detail about damages to an ox, like if you cut its tendon or an ox destroys its eye, of a man rents an ox and his eye gets destroyed, what he has to pay for it. So very interesting, but those were the times. I imagine if we lived in a farming community today, and there are farms still, by the way, if we lived in a farming community, that we would have to have similar type of policies and procedures, precepts to guide us in those things. And then you would take them to your town council if you could not settle the dispute, right? So Abraham surely observed the laws of the land as well as whatever laws that he was given by the Creator. Remember, the Creator appeared to him, right? More than once, right? And he would obey those laws of the land as long as they didn't conflict with anything that came out of the Creator's mouth for him, right? And we've already discussed, since the Bible mentions sin several times in Genesis prior to Moses, that divine law must have existed and been revealed to humanity prior to Moses coming down the mountain with the tablets, right? Some of the things that I noted that lots of times it talks about good men in the Bible. Abel was righteous, right? Enoch pleased God. Noah was blameless and walked with God. He was a preacher of righteousness. So they were given some kind of law to preach, right? And they shared. And maybe those are the exact things that came down to Abraham. I can't tell you for sure, but I'm pretty confident in my own mind that that's, how God worked it through those times. It was so prevalent that it was even carried over into these myths of these other cultures. So the law was there. It's no doubt the servants of God felt it incumbent upon themselves or by decree to share and to teach about God. So from the very time of Adam, it was a sin to do all these things: worshiping false gods, idols, taking God's name in vain, desecrating the Sabbath, dishonoring your parents, to kill, to commit adultery, to steal, to bear false witness. I believe that these are all in force, and we can see them in action in the scriptures. So let's quickly go through some of these as well. First, we'll read the law, right? Exodus 20. This is found on the tablets given to Moses, written with God's finger, right? And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, which has brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me, right? Well, that was from the beginning. So, right? At the beginning, God created. He was the only God. He was there. There is no other gods before him, so there shouldn't be, right? And he even appeared to Abraham and said, I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur to the Chaldees, right? So that one's kind of obvious, and there's various places where you can see that same thing, but the whole creation story screams this first commandment, right? No other gods. See, for your notes. Abraham's servant, even in Genesis 24:48, said, I bowed and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, right? That was the one God. But Abraham knew the Lord. He didn't worship any false gods that it came into being because they weren't really into being, right? They were the gods of people's imagination, invisible idols, if you will. And this one I talked about the last time I spoke a little bit. the way it's written, it's hard to grasp it. It says, from then, this is right before the days of Noah, right? And then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. You'd be like, oh, that's cool. They were calling. No, they already knew the Lord. This was something different. And that word began to call, that really means, it's kind of like where Nimrod became a mighty hunter. They set themselves against the Lord. They profaned it. And the word there, chalel, is to profane, right? The men began, right? They began to profane the name of the Lord, right? I put the companion Bible note down there, right? That says basically what I've already just explained, so I won't reread that. But God came first, and then people began to call other things God, be it the sun, the moon, the stars, animals, what have you. Second commandment, as we number them, and you can number these many different ways, I would imagine. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or likeness of anything that's upon the heaven above, or it's in the earth beneath, or it's in the water under the earth. Wait, didn't God command there to be images cut into the tabernacle? And in the vestments of the priests and so on? Bells and pomegranates and cherubim, right? The Ark of the Covenant. But why is that not against this? You shall not bow down thyself to them or worship them. This is a two-part law. It's not just making the image, because God made image. God asked those images to be made in often cases, right? Put bells and pomegranates and palm trees, right? But to bow down to them or serve them is what makes that command have the power, right? And then the favorite part of this verse is, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. He's not jealous of other gods, because there was no other gods. He just means that I made you for myself, right? Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. And now, just even writing this on the tablets, that means that he was doing this before the time of the tablets. Yes? Why would you? Yeah, well, obviously. It's really a no-brainer. I've been doing this. This is who I am, right? And what I will continue to do, right? And I was thinking about that too. Like the men being aimed to call on the name of the Lord. Wait a minute, Abel worshiped the Lord, right? Noah worshiped the Lord. So yeah, people were calling on the name of the Lord before that. So images. The only valid image of God is us. God created us in his image, right? And we aren't to make any other images of God or of men and worship them as God, right? But Jacob's father-in-law, Laban, was an idolater, okay? And we're going to pick up his story here in Genesis 31. We're going to start in verse 19, and we'll jump around a little bit. Laban went to shear his sheep, and you remember that Jacob was working for Laban, right? And Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. That word images is down at the bottom from the Strong's, teraphim, right? Which is a family idol. Comes from the Rapha, which means to heal. And so these were, these little talisman has the power to heal, right? So much type of thing. Idolatry. So, and Rachel was also obviously an idolater too, and a thief at this point, because she's stealing these from her father. And a liar. And she'll lie. I found that the Ten Commandments were probably, I can't prove the Sabbath one. I think they were all broken in Eden. And I would not doubt that there are many commandments transgressed in each transgression. So here we read then that Jacob stole away unaware. He didn't steal anything. He left secretly, unaware to Laban the Syrian, and he told him that he fled. Hey, I'm not telling you, I'm getting out of here. So he takes off, and it was finally told to Laban 3 days later. Right? So Laban pursues Jacob, but the God of Jacob, in between here, came to Laban in the dream and said, don't talk to Jacob, good or bad. Don't you say a thing, right? So he's like, oh, okay. I'm an idolater, but this is God appearing to me. Yeah, okay. So 7 days later, he catches up with Jacob, and we read it here in verse 29. Okay. He says, this is Laban talking, it's in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spoke to me yesternight, saying, take you heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though that you would needs be gone because you sore longed after your father's house, yet why for did you steal my gods? Right? I know you were longing for to go to your father's house, but why'd you take my little gods? Why'd you take my little idols? Right? And Jacob said, I was afraid, that's why I left, peradventure that you would by force take your daughters away from me. Right? So that's why he was worried, and that's why he left. He says, but go ahead, go ahead and search. Whoever you find your gods, your teraphim, your idols, let them not live. So this is a negative example of that command, right? Go ahead, you could kill him, whoever they finds it. He doesn't know that Rachel took him, right? So Laban goes into Jacob's tent, he goes into Leah's tent, and the two maidservants' tent, and he doesn't find him. So he goes out of Leah's tent, and he enters into Rachel's tent, and it's like, oh, it's the last one. Nope. Now Rachel took the images, and she hid them in the camel's furniture, and she sat on them. And Laban searched the tent and didn't find them. And she says to her father, hey, I can't get up so you can check the camel because the way of women is upon me, right? And it was customary to keep yourself separated if you had an issue of blood. So he searched and he doesn't find the images, right? So yeah, she was following her father's footsteps, I think, right there, right? I mean, Laban, lied and cheated Jacob about his wages and an idolater and so forth. But we see in the end, and Jacob knew this all along, that it was a sin to worship false gods or idols. So let's see what he did with them at the end here. Jacob said unto his household, to all that were with him, put away the strange gods that are among you and be clean and change your garments. Look, these have made you filthy, right? And they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which are in their hands, all their earrings or nose rings. In this case, it says ears, so it's that rings could be nose rings, earrings, anything like that. So, and Jacob took them and hid them under the oak. It wasn't so he can go back and get them later, take them to the Shechem pawn shop. He was getting rid of them, burying. Nobody's going to use these idols again, right? And buried them. Even in comparing, I was reading Job, and Job's like in verse 26 through 28 of Job 31. He said, if I beheld the sun when it shined, or the moon walking in its brightness, and my heart had been secretly enticed, or my mouth had kissed my hand, then these were in iniquity to be punished by the judge, for I should have denied the God that is above. So he knew that even worship, and again, I put him somewhere around the time between Abraham and Moses. Again, not of Israel at all, right? May have been related to Esau, right? They say Jobab, he might have been Jobab, but Jobab, he was from the south side of Esau, Basra, right? So it was known that you couldn't have other gods, and they knew it was wrong. How did they know that? Well, you could know by nature what is God, as Romans says, but somebody had to tell them this somewhere along the lines, and that had to be God through either himself appearing or one of his mouthpieces, his prophets, right? But this was already a known thing, and that's how it also went into to other codes or other religions. But lots of times they were pantheistic, so it was okay just to add a God in there, but that's how our God is different. He says no, right? He also says, you shall not take the name of the Lord God in vain, which means emptiness, right? Don't take my name and don't mean it, right? And I've used this example before. I mean, a lot of people say, well, this is pronunciation. And Brian did a big series on pronouncing names, and it's not that, right? As he says, God's not hooked on phonics. But what it is, and I think one of the best examples is a betrothal, right? So Mr. Monogamy marries Miss Promiscuous. She doesn't act like Mrs. Monogamy anymore, but she persists in acting like she's not bound to her husband. So she's taken his name, because that's what you do when you get married. She's taken his name in vain. in emptiness. She didn't believe in it. She didn't have no purpose. She said she was his alone, but she did not behave like it. It's hypocrisy, right? And hypocrisy has always been railed against. It could be taking his name lightly, taking an oath, but not really meaning it. Well, yeah, I'll put my hand on the Bible, but I don't believe in God. So what's the difference, right? That type of thing, right? It could be blaspheming or cursing him. I'll mention Job, right? Job's wife's like, curse God and die. And all this, Job did not sin with his lips. He would not do it. He would not take the Lord's name in vain or just because of his misery pronounce something in emptiness. Here's a positive example of not taking his name in vain. Abraham had faith, so he obeyed. He obeyed him, right? And because he obeyed him, that he was not guilty of transgressing that first, second, or third commandment, right? But we do know that Romans 4:3, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness, right? Galatians 3:6, that's the same thing. Abraham believed God, it was accounted to him for righteousness, right? And James tells us, though, that his faith was wrought with his works, and by his works his faith was made perfect, right? That because he believed, it was then manifest in obedience. And I think that's, a lot of people put the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, or so forth, or the ox, because it gored the horse. So the whole thing is, the faith of Jesus Christ is that he believed, because he came from the Father, he believed everything the Father said. The Father cannot lie, and neither can Jesus Christ, right? And we need to have that same faith that God is true and every man is a liar if they oppose anything that God says in this. So here's a negative example of taking the Lord's name in vain. Esau, right? And you know the story, right? He has the birthright, that was the father's blessing and the supremacy he would have had, handed down to him, but he didn't count it of value. So, and some people do this with the blood of Jesus Christ. They don't count the value, and they trod the Son of God over again, right? And the Bible talks about that. Look, I'm going to die. My physical being is more important than my spiritual self. So what good is this birthright? So he despised his birthright, it says. And he's talked about even in Hebrews as being a profane person who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. There he is again. Profane. He profaned the name of the Lord in doing so. How did he profane? How did the priest profane the name of the Lord? Right? Yeah, they did foreign things, strange fire and so forth. Making offerings of animals that weren't to be offered, right? Not perfect animals, right? And Esau also profaned the name of the Lord by saying that I belong to him, this is him, but then not acting like it, right? How do we act like it? Well, that's the first part of the verse there, and that's why I put the whole thing up there. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. And you have to look diligently at yourself in case you fail of the grace of God. How can I fail the grace of God? The grace of God is powerful. It takes but if you're not trying to walk in holiness, it's because you don't know him. And you've already fallen from grace. Or you're trying to establish your own works because you don't believe in his finished work of grace, right? And then for your notes, Ephesians 5. I put 1 through 11. But it talks about to be dear followers of God, like dear children, to walk in love. And it says how to do all this stuff. Don't fornicate. Don't be unclean. Don't be covetousness. Don't have covetousness. It says, don't let any of those things be once named among you, as is becoming the saints, right? You have to walk worthy of the vocation and the name that you are called. That's what this means. Walk as children of light. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. And that's what you're going to read when you read the rest of Ephesians 5, 1 through 11. Okay? Brings me to the Sabbath day, the fourth commandment as we count them. Remember the Sabbath day. That's today. I'm glad you all remembered. To keep it holy, 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger that's within your gates. Why? For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So let's read that, how back in creation he blessed it. I noticed in this reading that all the other days of creation are mentioned once, but he mentions the Sabbath here 3 times. So calls it out. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work from which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day, not because he was tired, he ceased from doing his work, because it was done from all the work he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work, which God created and made. And we also know, and for your notes, Mark 2, 27, 28, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So it was made for man, not for God. Right? God made it, but he didn't make it for himself. So that's something to be said. And then also in Genesis, you read Genesis 1:14, right? And it talks about the lights in the sky separating day and night, and that they're for signs and seasons and for days and years. So what Genesis tells us is there was already a system of counting days in process. God started it 1 through 7, right? And thus it continued. And here I saw this little example here. I thought I'd share this with you. Again, grain of salt, but I mean, I'm just showing some of these examples, and you do what you will with them. I do believe all the 10 commandments were enforced before they were handed down in tablets, okay? Genesis 7:11, we read about Noah in the second month, in the 17th day of the month. Okay, he's doing days, he's doing months, in that is the weeks as well. Why wouldn't he be counting if he's counting those? Right down at the bottom, all the days where Adam lived 930 years and he died. Why? If they're counting days, wouldn't that mean that they would be keeping track of this from the beginning? And the moon was set for the month. Wouldn't they be counting from that moon? Because it's the back in the first bullet there, the second month in the 17th day of the moon, right? Right? And then I thought this was interesting. The ark rested in the 7th month and the 17th day of the month on Mount Ararat. And in the second month, in the 7th and 20th day of the month, the earth had become dry. So he sends forth a raven, right? Remember that? Noah sends forth a raven. And I believe it was 7 days till then he lets out the dove. And I'll show you why, because he repeats it here with the dove. And then he stayed in yet another 7 days and then addeth to send forth the dove from the ark, right? And then he stays another 7 days in verse 12 and sends forth the dove and added it, that it don't turn back to him anymore. So what I believe was happening there is that he was counting in the Sabbaths and releasing the birds out on the Sabbath to go find rest. And it even says the dove found no rest, for its foot, right? So it came back. So I thought that was interesting. And then I wanted to read to you from Matthew Henry's commentary on that. But before I do, I wanted to also remember prior to receiving the tablets, God told the Israelites to remember the Sabbath. They didn't even get the tablets yet, right? In Exodus 16. And he said, he started to do the manna, right, with them, right? And he told them, he just started this in Exodus 16, before the tablets. How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? What commandments and laws? Well, these are the ones we've been talking about, right? So I think it's important. So for your notes, Exodus 16, 25 through 30 should do it, because it also says, then people rested on the 7th day. That was his teaching of the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath day and how to observe it. Do your labor for 6 days and then rest on the 7th. Matthew Henry had something in here, and take this for what you will, but he says, Noah sent forth a raven through the window of the ark, which went forth, and the Hebrew phrase is going forth and returning, that is flying about and feeding on the carcasses that floated, but returning to the ark for rest. Probably not in it, but upon it. This gave Noah little satisfaction. Therefore, he sent a dove, which returned the first time with no good news, but probably wet and dirty. But the second time she brought an olive leaf in her bill, which appeared to be first plucked off, a plain indication that now the fruit trees, began to appear above the water. Note here that Noah sent forth the dove the second time 7 days after the first time, and the third time was after 7 days too, and probably the first sending of her out was 7 days after the sending forth of the raven. This intimates that it was done on the Sabbath day, which so it should seem. Noah religiously observed in the ark, having kept the Sabbath in solemn assembly of his little church, and then expected special blessings from heaven and inquired concerning them. And he goes on and he does some more explanations about it. But I thought it was interesting because when I first became a Bible reader, I wasn't a Christian yet, and I discovered the Sabbath. Sabbath was one of the first things I discovered reading the Bible, because I opened up in Genesis and I started to read. And I've told you that story before. I thought I was the only one in the world who knew that. And I didn't even know that there was Jews keeping the Sabbath forever. I didn't get that far yet. So, but I know when I got to the story of Noah, I thought that same thing, right? Because God had shown me the Sabbath at first. So that Sabbath was sticking out in my head in here. So I just thought it was interesting. And a lot of the commentaries all said that. Now, Matthew Henry wasn't a Sabbath keeper, by the way, and yet he said this, right? But a lot of the commentaries say the same thing. Pulpit commentary, a seventh-day Sabbath must have been prescribed to man in Eden. Dwight Moody, the Sabbath was binding in Eden. It's been in force ever since. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, 7 days, a strong presumptive proof that Noah observed the Sabbath in the ark. Eliot commentary, much can be said in favor of the primeval institution of the Sabbath, and it's being known to the family of Abraham. And then Matthew Henry himself, Sabbaths are as ancient as the world, and I see no reason to doubt that the Sabbath was religiously observed by the people of God throughout the patriarchal age. The patriarchal age included, obviously, Abraham and Job. And it was a customary time for the ancients that used that 7-day period for other things, for feasting and for mourning, stuff like that. So very interesting. Brings us to commandment number 5, not to dishonor your parents. In Exodus 20, verse 12, it says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God shall give you. Some examples, like I said, you can go back to the garden on almost every one of these ones, right? God said, don't do this, and they did it, right? So some dishonoring here, not by not believing, not obeying, not confessing, and not owning to the thing. Noah also, right? You read about the story where after he landed and he got drunk and he laid naked, and I won't get into the details of this one, but it says that Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness and told his brothers. He went and chatted about it. And then it says that the brethren, Shem and Japheth, took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, walked backwards to cover the nakedness of the father. They acted righteously to their father, while Ham or Canaan, whoever it may have been, did not. And so the examples are there. And you also can read Jacob and Esau. They both had dishonored their parents as well, didn't they? Right? Deception and lies and whatever, right? They were told not to take a wife from Pandam Aram, that they had to go, back and, take a wife from the daughters of Canaan or whatever. And Esau didn't do it, but Jacob did end up doing it. So there's positive and negative obedience in that. So these things were all showing that they were in effect in this time long before Moses ever had to climb that mountain. Thou shalt not murder, right? So the word there, and I have the Strongs up on there, means to dash in pieces or kill, especially to murder. And the word is do not murder, because God himself kills, right? He had killed, Uzzah for touching the ark, right? And he has struck, people down, and that's his prerogative because all have sinned, right? So he is not committing murder when he kills, right? He takes away what was his, the breath of life, right? So this verse is, thou shalt not murder. I've had to have some talks with some folks, like some folks who were in Iraq or whatever that did shoot people. And I had to, let them know that that wasn't considered murder in a time of war, right? So be compassionate when you run across folks, because there's a lot of people who are torn up over certain things and they think they can't be forgiven. But our God is a wonderful God full of grace, and he can forgive so much. It's amazing. And he forgave murder, with King David, with Uriah the Hittite, right? And Paul, the many times he confessed to, consented to the death of Christians and so forth. I was thinking about, do not murder. And I actually was thinking about this for every one of these as we go along. It's like, even without reading the scripture, it was already there in the positive. Like, do not murder. God commanded Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Well, murder would be the opposite of that. So the positive command seems to come first, right? He says, of every tree in the garden you may eat, but you don't eat of this tree, right? Whoa, so look at that. The Ten Commandments we're reading right now. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Right? I am the God. I'm the one who took you out of Egypt. Right? The positive command first, and then here's all the thou shalt nots. It's interesting that I don't know why that thought came to me, but it did, and it seems to hold true, right? I mean, the command to be fruitful and multiply is to create and spread life. Murder is the opposite, and it would be a violation of the command to be fruitful and multiply. For this, Ron pointed out to have a relation. For this reason, you leave your father and mother to go get married. But then the law for adultery is right. The negative description in the judgments. Right. Sure. Well, I was going to hit this one, right? Cain and Abel, right? So, and this is true for all of you as well, right? If you do well, won't you be accepted? Right? You'll be accepted. And if you don't do well, sin's lying there at your door. He's crouching at your door like a lion ready to pounce on you, and you're going to desire it. But you're supposed to rule over it. You have dominion. And if you're in Christ, you're set free from that bondage, right? He could have been set free if he would have trusted in the Lord, but he didn't, right? So he didn't do well. He got something inside him snapped, and he rose up and slew his brother, right? Doesn't say the brother provoked him. As a matter of fact, he's called righteous Abel. I don't think he provoked him in any way. But this is a direct violation, of the murder law before the murder law came into stone. Again, Lamech slain a man to my wound. We talk about this back in the days of Noah as well, right? So I won't belabor it. You can catch that from the last time I spoke. But again, murder was there as a negative way before the commandments. All of these commands are there in some form or fashion, and usually just implied, not written in stone yet. But they're there. Here you got also the admonition not to eat blood, but down below, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God, man, he made him men. Genesis 9, way before Exodus 20, right? You could call that the law of the covenants, the law that was contained in the Ark of the Covenant, the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. All right. Joseph, Potiphar's wife. We know that story, right? What did he say? Right? So and we'll talk about her one more time with coveting. She cast her eyes upon Joseph and she coveted him and then said, lie with me. Right? But he says, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? How did he know that would be great wickedness and sin? When he opened up his scriptures? No, he didn't have any that we know of. Maybe he had something. I don't know. Obviously, they had writing. We saw the tablets and stuff before from Hammurabi and Lipit Ishtar and Ernamu, right? So there was writing. I mean, they could have had something. It's hard to carry around clay tablets in your pocket, though. Did they have pockets?
But it was against God too, so it wasn't like this law of Pharaoh.
Yeah, and he knew it was against God. He knew it would be against also the his master, Potiphar, but so he knew, he ran away, right? Flee fornication, the New Testament says. Flee fornication, right? But it was there and it existed, right? Abimelech, fool me once, fool me twice, man, right? So you know this story, and if you don't, it's Abraham. Sarah was a good-looking wife. It was also his half-sister. So she says, hey, tell people you're my sister so they don't kill me, right? Do me this favor, don't kill me. And so he does it, and then Abimelech takes Sarah, but God appears to him and says, hey, this is Abraham's wife, dude. And he's like, whoa, I didn't know that, right? I swear in the integrity of my heart, innocency of my hand, I did this. If I knew it was another man's wife, I wouldn't have done it. And God the word of God's, powerful and can read the hearts and the minds. So he knew that this was true. He goes, yeah, I know that you were innocent. You did this in the integrity of your heart. That's why I kept you from sinning against me. So something with the power of God had him halt and stop. For I suffered thee not to touch her, God told him, right? So again, there's in the power of God, he could protect you in your integrity, even if you were doing something unbeknownst. And I know that he's probably done that for me over time in different things where you didn't see his hand, but then it was there. But very interesting. And Abimelech then goes to Abraham and says, what did I do to you? Why did you bring upon me and my kingdom a great sin? He knew it was a sin beforehand. He knew it was a sin before God even appeared to him and told him. That's why he said, I did this in integrity of my heart. So the laws were there. They were already in existence and well known by most people. I don't think it's just like a bird that knows how to migrate. I don't think it was inherent in you when you were a baby, but you had to be taught this. And that's where the preachers of righteousness, I think, came in. And then, that same thing happened to, was it Isaac, right? And with Abimelech, once again, right? Probably a different Abimelech. Could be. Just one generation. Yeah. Rebecca, was the one in that case. But same thing happened, right? But adultery was present and known. Thou shalt not steal. So there's the word for steal. I think I wanted to put that after the verse, so we'll put the verse up now. Thou shalt not steal, right? Exodus 20:15. Well, it was known in that time of Genesis too, and again, you can go back, even into the garden, right? But let's go with Jacob and Laban again, right? And he made that deal with Laban. Laban's like, hey, you're cutting me out, right? And he was really cheating Jacob. That's why, lots of times people who cheat think that you're the one cheating them. They cast whatever, their character upon you. And he says, I'll pass through all the flock this day, removing all the speckled and spotted cattle and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled, those are mine, right? And then all the nice pure sheep, they would be yours, right? Be they, all solid black, all solid white, all solid brown, whatever they may be. So then my righteousness will be seen by you, right? And anything that I get that's not speckled because of the breeding, then that you think I'm taking yours, you would see that if there's anything speckled in my sheep, that you could count it as I stole it, and that's a bad thing. And they knew this way before the tablets, right? Joseph was stolen. He was kidnapped. He was man-napped, right? And then when they put the silver and gold back into Benjamin's bag, if you remember that story, right? The brother said, look, why would we steal from you? Right? We brought this to you. Right? Why would we do that? But they knew stealing was wrong is the point. How did they know if there was no law? They did know. False witnesses. You shouldn't bear false witness. Wow. Didn't God say? It's interesting how he does it by omission, right? Didn't God say you could eat of every tree of the garden? Well, yeah, he did say that. But then he added the exception clause, right? But not this. God says you're going to die. You won't die, right? He's bearing false witness against the first humans, right? Against God. He's slandering God too. God truthfully told Adam and Eve what they were and what to do. But Satan accused God of lying too. Blasphemous. False witness. The Pharaoh's wife, right? Joseph's, the wife of Joseph's master, falsely claims that Joseph tried to rape her. Her false charge resulted in Joseph being placed in prison, perhaps for life. He didn't know at that time. And the point is, false witnesses were known in those times, and they have grave consequences when you're caught. Or if you're not caught. In this case, it was a grave consequence for Joseph, right? But in the end, it worked out for him, right? Because God knew and had a plan. It would be for good, just like he did with the brothers, right? Musical. And the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Right, because illicit, you could say, hey, I want to buy a car like that, but not, hey, I desire, why does he have that? I deserve that car. You don't deserve that car, right? Or what if I want it more than him, right? Look, if you want something, that's okay. You work hard, and then when you've earned the money, then you buy it, right? I mean, now you've turned that desire into something that you worked hard for in good principles and then bought with your hard-earned money, right? There's good coveting and there's bad coveting, right? Like Paul says, covet earnestly the good gifts, right? And these are the things that we should do. But we know that, again, the easy one is to go back into the garden. She looked at it because she listened to Satan's lies, and she saw that the tree was desired to make one wise, and it was pleasant to the eyes. It was good for food, and so she takes it, eats it, and gives some to her husband, right? Because he coveted it too, obviously. Well, I don't want her to have something I don't have. I'm gonna have a bite of that too, right? Right? A Pharaoh or the wife of Joseph's master as well. Again, when we pointed that out, was covetous. And all these show that the 10 commandments were in force from the time of Adam, right? They weren't written in stone, but they were obviously known by people. And you've seen just by the few examples, and we went through these really fast. You went through the few examples that to show that they're there. They may be implied. You may have to look at positives instead of negatives of the case, but they're all there. And there are many more. I mean, that was just a quick reading. Here's some other principles too, right? Noah knew what creatures were clean and unclean. How did he know that if it wasn't written in Leviticus yet, right? How did he know, right? Moving things are food. Anything that moves, not anything that's dead, they're not moving, right? You can't eat dead things. We talked about consuming blood, right? The problems and negative consequences of indecency or drunkenness, right? The tithing principle, he ties to Melchizedek. Melchizedek, right, was both king and priest, right? So kind of like church and state, right? And Abraham honored both of those, right? Then you get into the other sexual deviations besides adultery, right? Homosexuality, sex with another kind, and it goes into some other gross stuff, but it tells you, hey, that stuff was wrong and sinful, right? That was when the angels came to Lot. You remember that one, right? In Genesis, all these, you notice down the left side, it's all Genesis, right? Other principles that were there. Quarantining of self, we read about that with Rachel on the camel, right? Marriage or sex with your father's wife prohibited, right? And all these things were there and present and known in Genesis, right? Absent are a lot of the ritualistic, ceremonial aspects of God's law, right? That seemed to come later. Although there was sacrifice, we know Adam and Eve had a sacrifice performed for them, and then we know that Cain and Abel came and sacrificed right away, right? Did a sacrifice, one of the fruit of the ground and one of an animal, and those could be allusions to holy days. They could be. That could even be an allusion to the Sabbath, because it says in the course of time, which is just a revolution of time. That could have been the week too. Unknown. Don't make a dogma of it, but know that all these things were there and they were in force. God didn't leave his people without a rule to walk along, to be good and holy and just, or to know what was right and what was wrong. The Lord appeared to Abraham, right, by the oaks of Mamre, right? He was there, right? Just a couple of commentator passages here. Expositor's Greek Testament, right? The close reading of actions in Genesis and Job, and we mentioned Job a couple times today, reveals both knowledge and violations of the commandment which later became the Decalogue for Israel, right? Walter Kaiser in God's Promised Plan and Gracious Law. So endemic is the moral law to the whole of the Mosaic law, and that evidences for its abiding nature can be found in the fact that even before it was given on Sinai, it was held to be normative and binding upon all who aspired to living by faith. In fact, every one of the 10 Commandments is already implicitly found in the Genesis record, even before their publication on Sinai. Moses didn't invent moral law, God did. And he had already been holding men and women responsible for heeding it millennia before he finally wrote it on tablets of stone. So we're not the only ones to have come up with this. I mean, this is well-known stuff, right? And I think I had mentioned this one before, James Bruckner, Implied Law in the Abraham Narrative. He says, law is presented in this first canonical book of Scripture, talking of Genesis, as part of the created order. It was part of it. Law came with it, right? Thou shalt not. You shall eat of these trees, you shall not eat of that tree. And he says it's the basis for all cultures and times. Thinking of biblical law in the context of creation as prior to the Sinaitic covenant establishes biblical law as operative beyond the confines of a historical past or single culture, and establishes it in the bone and flesh of created humanity. Like I said, even these foreign nations had some concepts of equity and justice. Where did they get them from? Right? The principles of the 10 Commandments long predate both the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, and they were commanded to all mankind. Between the lines, read line upon line, Genesis, you'll see God's righteous standards, including those 10, right? And we know they came from the beginning, because without law, there is no sin, right? Supposedly. Well, look, the devil sinned from the beginning. 1 John 3:8. There's so many examples that law existed and that there was a consequence for it. Right? We found that all the laws are present. All the moral laws are there, right? And we believe that God is love, and that God showed us how to love him and how to love our neighbors and how to do that from creation. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Lots of times nowadays, you'll read of people who want to do one or the other, or put the emphasis on one or the other, right? It's always been incumbent that we keep the commandments of God, but no man has been saved by keeping the commandments of God, right? Now, Jesus Christ was sinless and perfect as well, but it was his faith in the Father that he was able to be raised again by the Father, right? And the faith of Jesus Christ. Some people say they have faith in Jesus Christ, and they won't give a hoot about walking in holiness. And I'm telling you, the times are coming, brethren, like it was in the days of Noah. The times are coming where it's going to be really important that you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk, which is hypocrisy, and it's going to count against you. You're going to be held accountable for every idle word, right? So not just the faith in Jesus and what he did, but the faith of Jesus. The faith of Jesus was that God is true, and he is right, and he is just, and that I should obey him over anything else, including inclinations of the flesh. And that's our faith as well. Because blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter it through the gates into the city, right? Gentiles and Jews who are obedient to God's commandments and they trust in the Lord like Jesus did, they are living forever with Jesus. Praise the Lord, right? That's what it's about. The 10 Commandments existed before Moses and are still important today. God gave his laws for our good. They're based on love, and they help us to know how to love God and love our fellow man. And I'll leave you with this one. 1 John 5, 1 through 3. You know this well. But it's so true in these end times, more than ever, because holiness seems to not be a quest of people anymore. They think they want to walk their own ways, and the gods are just going to wink at it and be okay with whatever they do. And it's not true. It's not true. God is not okay with sin. Never has been. But whosoever is believing that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. And everyone that is loving him that begat is loving him that is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and we keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And brethren, his commandments are not grievous. Okay? Thanks for listening. Sorry for the internet interruption earlier. We'll try and get that corrected on the recording. Thanks and God bless. And we'll be back here next week. I'll turn it back over to